I absolutely think it's a U.S. proxy war, and the goals to me have been made pretty explicit. Going back to 2013, the fall of 2013, a guy named Carl Gershman, he was the head at the time of something called the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a U.S. government-funded organization that essentially helps carry out U.S. foreign policy goals abroad, which center around enforcing U.S. hegemony and destabilizing governments that stand in the way. So this guy, Carl Gershman, said in an op-ed in the Washington Post that Ukraine, quote, is the biggest prize. And what he meant by that is he explained that if Ukraine could be pulled into the US-led global order, then that could redound to Russia as well, and even lead to the overthrow of Vladimir Putin, because Ukraine is so important strategically and historically to Russia. And shortly after that, you had protests break out inside Ukraine.
And then things turned ugly. The crowds turned and run as riot police burst out from behind their cordon, literally kicking and beating their way through protesters.
But the U.S. and its allies exploited that and basically turned those protests into a coup, where Yanukovych, who was basically trying to play both sides, he was trying to be nice to both Russia and the U.S., he was overthrown, and he was replaced with a government that was stacked with people from the Ukraine's far right and was heavily favorable to the U.S. And in fact, there was a leaked phone call from Victoria Nuland, who was the top official in the Obama administration at the time. She's now back under Biden, where she is plotting with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine who the next government should be.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience, and have the UN help glue it. And, the EU.
And lo and behold, the person who they decided should be Ukraine's next prime minister, a guy named Yatsenyuk, he became the prime minister after this coup government took over. And so basically the goals then were to bring Ukraine into the U.S. orbit and hope that that could further weaken Russia. And the reason why is simply because Russia, it's a top nuclear power. It's a longtime geopolitical foe of the U.S. And so it can act as a deterrent to U.S. control of the world. And so I think in the thinking of these people, anybody who is a deterrent to U.S. power needs to be destabilized and even overthrown. And that's why we've had in Ukraine this ensuing war for the last 8 years, where Russian speakers in the east of Ukraine, who didn't want to live under a coup government, especially after the new government essentially banned the Russian language, they rose up. And there's been a war in which Russia has been backing rebels in the east and U.S. has been backing the government that it helped install. And that's a proxy war. And this proxy war escalated heavily when Putin in February of this year decided to invade and bring that war to an end. And that's why we've seen so much chaos and bloodshed since. But even in the process, the U.S. has made clear how committed they are to using Ukraine to weaken Russia with their statements. Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said that our goal is to see Russia weakened.
We want to see Russia weakened.
Not to bring this war to an end. They want to use Ukraine essentially as cannon fodder to bleed Russia, much as Afghanistan was used in the 1980s to bleed the Soviet Union. And this has been made clear. Adam Schiff, who's a big Democratic hero in the U.S., 2 years ago, so 2 years before Russia invaded, he said, the United States aids Ukraine and her people.
The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
What he was saying there was that the U.S. was using Ukraine via the war that broke out in the Donbass to fight Russia over there. And so the obvious answer that I have to that is if you don't want to see Russia fight Ukraine over there, then we shouldn't be using Ukraine to fight Russia from here. But unfortunately, the dominant policy of the U.S. establishment is to use Ukraine as cannon fodder, and hence why we have the catastrophe that we have today.